Hi there. Welcome to this special edition of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Obviously, I'm not Daniel Davis. I am filling in for him while he is on a well deserved vacation. Today, we're going to talk about propaganda, Nord Stream pipeline, and how the various governments around the world like to feed you a healthy helping of cow manure. There's some cruder expressions for it, but let's be polite in this case. So yesterday, the Wall Street Journal comes out with a story that they've got not just a story, but the story, the truth about what happened to the Nord Stream pipeline. I describe their account as the Gilligans Island version. If you're familiar with Gilligan's Island, the TV show, the captain and Gilligan, they set sail for a 3-day cruise and didn't come back. They got stuck on an island. It was Gilligan and Marianne and Ginger, the professor, and the Howells. That's sort of the account that they're presenting in the Wall Street Journal. That it was five guys and a chick that climbed on a boat that I guess they got drunk and decided this would be a good idea. But really, when you read through the story, they're blaming that this was Zelensky was involved, but ultimately the fall guy who gets the blame, former General Zaluzhny, who was leading the Ukrainian army, but was relieved of command last year, replaced by General Sirsky. Sirsky is known as the Butcher, and he is living up to his name, Butcher, not because he kills the enemy, but because he gets his own guys killed. Zaluzhny is supposedly an ambassador for Ukraine in London, except they've also already got an ambassador. So it's not clear what's up with him. But as part in the reporter who wrote this article for the Wall Street Journal in preparation for it called Zaluzhny up, and Zaluzhny was like, "What? No, that didn't happen." But it gives a very elaborate account, and it's designed, it coincides with the Germans bringing criminal charges against one of the Ukrainians who is hiding out or not hiding out, but in Poland. Apparently they know where he is, but the Poles aren't rushing out to pick this guy up. Now, the first thing, whenever you read the media, particularly the Washington Post, the New York Times, or the Wall Street Journal, and you see a story like this, you always have to ask yourself, why is this coming out now? What is this just a happy coincidence that the reporter got energized and decided this would be a great story and it just appears now? Or is there something else afoot? Now, the original account of what actually happened with Nord Stream was provided courtesy of Seymour Hersh on his Substack platform 2 years ago. And he laid out that this was a U.S. government operation carried out by personnel attached to the CIA. The base, the site that he talks about in Florida, he didn't identify this in his article, but where these divers came from is actually the CIA base for maritime operations. So, coincidence? I don't believe in coincidence. The Wall Street Journal account describes people who are, they're described as professional divers, but no real evidence to support that. They come across more like recreational divers. But the task of carrying explosives and properly planting them on a pipeline that far under the ocean is not something that weekend scuba divers can routinely do at all. In fact, what's interesting in the Wall Street Journal article, they describe how they, in one moment, they drop one of the explosives over the side before they even get to the right area. And then the fact that they're out there sailing around with a Ukrainian flag on their mast. Yeah, that's a low-key undercover operation. So Cy Hersh's story was that this was in fact directed by the United States. And we have great circumstantial evidence to support that. Immediately after the blast, the current Polish foreign minister, Sikorski, who just happens to be married to a prominent U.S. neoconservative by the name of Anne Applebaum, was quick to tweet out, "Hey, thanks to the United States, great job." He later took the tweet down and realized, oh, that probably wasn't too smart. The Liz Truss, who was then the Prime Minister of England, she was quick off the starting block as well to send congrats to the United States. So this was a U.S. operation. What makes the Wall Street Journal story so strange, and in subsequent, in reporting on German actions, that they've now indicted a Ukrainian. So Germany continues to supply tens of millions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. And yet the Ukrainians carried out, because this was not just some isolated people, this was a government policy in Ukraine to attack Nord Stream. And in blowing up Nord Stream, destroyed a critical component of Germany's economy. There's a video that will give you a little bit of background on this to set the stage. Gary, let's go ahead and show the Nord Stream video.
Who or what destroyed these pipelines 2 years ago? Those have been central questions for German investigators for many months. We know they've identified 4 divers seen near the spot at the time as being of particular interest. It's believed the authorities are working on the basis that this ship was used to transport the 4 to and from the site. It was raided by German police last year. In June this year, they issued an arrest warrant for one of the 4 divers, a Ukrainian called Volodymyr Z, who was living in Poland, and asked the government in Warsaw to arrest him. But he managed to cross into Ukraine in early July because Polish officials say the Germans didn't put his details on the database in time. The Nord Stream pipelines were once an important route for Russian gas to enter Western Europe. But the combination of sanctions once war began and then the sabotage itself stopped that permanently.
The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline was a severe economic blow to Germany. So now we're being asked to believe that the Germans know that it was Ukraine, not just some individual citizen, but someone connected with the government, that blew up their main an important economic lifeline for their country, and yet they're going to continue to funnel aid to them. Does that make sense to anybody? The Germans have never had a reputation for being incredibly stupid. But perhaps they're going to use this as their opportunity to make that case. The fact of the matter is that this piece of propaganda that's out now, and if you looked at in the video, you saw they referred to it as a ship. By naval definitions, that's not a ship. That's a boat. A boat is something that you can put on a ship. You can't put a ship, lift a destroyer and put it on an aircraft carrier. Can't happen. But that you can put put on a ship. So what we see is that the construction of this new narrative to put the blame first on Ukraine in particular, but then they also single out Zelensky. But they also it's a finger pointing at Zelensky. And this takes on a broader context in light of the recent Ukrainian invasion into the Kursk region of Russia. This was not a Ukrainian operation alone, far be it. This was a NATO planned and assisted invasion. The plan was pretty audacious, and if they had pulled it off, it would have created some new challenges for the Russians. But the original plan was for the Ukrainian forces to move rapidly through the Kursk region to the nuclear power plant that is located just to the west of the city of Kursk. And in trying to accomplish that, the Ukrainians failed. They were apparently, the original mission was to hold that nuclear facility and use it as a bargaining chip with Russia to maybe compel the Russians to give up the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which Russia has held since probably the second day of the start of what is known as the special military operation. The Ukrainians invaded Russia with around 11,000 troops. And a lot of these troops were rapidly redeployed from the Donbass region. Some were notified just 24 hours in advance to move. So this was not something that was well rehearsed with units that were practicing the movements that they would need to do. The plan was on paper, and they assembled the units and would tell them, here's what you're supposed to do. But apparently they did not have an ample opportunity to rehearse. In tandem with that operation, you've seen a lot of propaganda. For example, Ukrainian soldiers are taking selfies in front of the town signs. You'll see a sign behind the soldier saying, you know, this is Redovka. Well, then you go in to see other pictures. They got 4 or 5 other towns. It turns out all they're doing is they're photoshopping the title. It turns out it's the same picture, same person. They're showing tanks rolling through Kursk, Ukrainian tanks rolling through Kursk. Only problem is it's a picture of Kiev. So they're going all in on the propaganda to convince the West, yay, we're winning. Boy, we're triumphing. Meanwhile, at least 1/3 of that invading force has been destroyed already. 2/3 of the artillery, the armored vehicles, and the tanks have been destroyed. And the Ukrainians are discovering once again the lesson, what they failed to learn in the so-called counteroffensive of 2023, that whenever you try to launch an offensive operation like this without air power, it is doomed to failure. They have no means to sustain the operation. Yet the Ukrainians are keeping up the pretense that, oh yeah, we're winning. They've just named a governor that's supposedly going to rule over Kursk. It's all show. There is no there. And the Russians, from their standpoint, believe that they have the Ukrainians in an effective trap. They are killing, over the last 3 days, when you combine the casualties that Ukraine is suffering in just the Kursk region with those that are suffering in the Donbass, in the battles that are underway in Luhansk and Donetsk, it is the largest loss of life, largest number of casualties at any point in the last 2.5 years. The Ukrainian incursion, though, is having one very important effect. It is enraging the Russians. Right now, the Russians have conducted what's called a special military operation. And for many in the West, they go, what are they talking about? They're just playing with words. No, it really is. It's not a full-blown war. Russia has not fully mobilized and, more importantly, gone after all of the assets that it could go after. I think that we may be witnessing a shift now in the Russian strategic doctrine as far as what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. The number of Russian men now signing up voluntarily for the army has increased dramatically. Russia currently has been enrolling around 30,000 a month in the army. No problem. They're not having to go out and grab people off the streets and hide out for them in a nightclub or a restaurant and grab them as they're coming out. The Russians are signing up. Just the opposite of what you're seeing in Ukraine. But all of this comes back to that this failed not just a failed offensive into Kursk, but a catastrophic failure for Ukraine, because they've lost men, vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces that they can't afford to lose. And that blame's falling on Zelensky, which is why there are now rumors circulating that the West is drawing up plans to replace him with someone who will be seen as more open to negotiations with Russia. Because I do think, at least among some in the West, there's a dawning realization that this war cannot continue like this, and that Ukraine is ultimately going to have to find a negotiated solution. Only one little problem with that. You got to have another party to negotiate with. And the Russians, who were willing to negotiate and did negotiate in March of 2022 and actually had a deal on paper that Ukraine ultimately walked away from at the behest of the United States and then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Russians just came out about a month and a half ago, with another proposal. This proposal was harsher. The one from March of 2022 would have had the Russians relinquishing they're pulling the troops out of Donetsk and Luhansk. But now their proposal is they're going to keep Donetsk, they're going to keep Luhansk, they're going to keep Zaporizhia, they're going to keep Kherson. And what the Ukrainians can do is pull their forces out immediately, stop the fighting, and then let's have a ceasefire and negotiate. That was the offer 2 months ago. Now the offer, while Vladimir Putin has not come forward with specifics, let me predict it is going to be very simple. Ukraine surrenders, and it'll be up to Russia to figure out what Ukraine gets to keep. This means that Russia is going to take Odessa. Russia is going to take Kherson. And Ukraine, its existence as it is, will end. It will be a new thing, but it is not going to be the country that it was. It will be at least half the size, if not smaller. Already, it's lost half of its population, both through the war, combat, casualties, as well as people fleeing as refugees to go live somewhere else in Europe or around the world. So right now, when you see this Wall Street Journal article that just comes out of the blue, giving the true story about what happened at Nord Stream, you realize that it's part of a broader propaganda effort. There's a lot at play here that's ultimately going to determine how long Volodymyr Zelensky remains in the office of president in Ukraine. He's already served past when he was supposed to leave office, so he's already past his expiration date. And now I think the West is beginning to come to grips with the reality that the Russians, in terms of their offensive on the ground in the Donbass, are moving so rapidly that we're looking at a potential collapse of the Ukrainian army in what was now eastern Ukraine by the end of September, if not sooner. So that's a summary of activities in Ukraine, Russia, and the media propaganda. Always be questioning, never take it at face value. I'm Larry Johnson. You can find me at sonar21.com, but I'm here at the invitation of Danny Davis, Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Please subscribe, and like and leave your comments below. Thank you.